My fiancé told me. I feel embarrassed introducing you to certain people in my circle. I stayed calm, took off the ring, and ended everything that same night. Months later, she walked into a corporate meeting and realized several executives she wanted to impress already knew me personally by name. I just feel embarrassed introducing you to certain people in my circle. She said it the way someone might mention the weather. Casual, offhand, like it wasn't the kind of sentence that could detonate a 3-year engagement in under 4 seconds. I didn't respond right away. I set my glass down on the kitchen counter. Slowly, the ice shifted inside it, a small, quiet sound that somehow felt very loud in that moment. Danielle was still talking. Something about an upcoming dinner. Something about the Harrington Group executives and how appearances mattered and how she just needed me to understand that certain environments required a certain kind of presence. She used the word polish twice, maybe 3 times. I stopped counting after a while. I looked at her. She was beautiful when she spoke about ambition. Eyes sharp, jaw set, the particular energy of someone who had spent years sculpting an image and was furious at anything that threatened the frame. I had loved that about her once. That drive, that fire. But this wasn't fire. This was something else. Say that again, I said quietly. She paused. I'm not trying to be cruel. I just think you don't always read certain rooms the way. Not that part. She looked at me. Something flickered behind her eyes. Not regret. Not yet. More like the mild irritation of being interrupted. I said I feel embarrassed sometimes. Introducing you to certain people. She crossed her arms. It's not an attack. It's honest. I thought we were being honest with each other. I nodded slowly. Then I reached down, took her left hand gently in mine, and slid the ring off her finger. She blinked. What are you? I placed it on the counter beside my glass. What are you doing? Her voice shifted. Higher now. Surprised. I'm leaving, I said. Because of one conversation? You're being dramatic. I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair. Checked my phone out of habit. There were 2 missed calls from a number I'd need to return in the morning. I slipped the phone into my pocket. You're not even going to argue, she said. You're just going to walk out? I looked at her one last time. You told me you're embarrassed by me, I said. There's nothing to argue about. I left. She thought she was watching someone ordinary walk away. She had no idea who she had just humiliated. She texted at 11:47 that night. Can we talk tomorrow? I think you overreacted. I read it. Didn't respond. Set my phone face down on the hotel nightstand. I'd been staying at a furnished apartment downtown for the last few weeks while my own place was being renovated, and stared at the ceiling for a while. There was no anger. That was the strange part. People expect anger after something like that. A slammed door or a long drive with music too loud, or at least the hot, satisfying self-righteousness of being wronged. I didn't feel any of it. Just a kind of cold clarity, the way the air feels after a thunderstorm. Everything very still, very clean. I should have seen the signs earlier. That's not me being self-critical. That's just honesty. The signs were there. Small things at first. The kind of small that's easy to dismiss as stress or a bad day, or just the natural friction of 2 people building a life in a city that rewards ambition and punishes anything that looks like stillness. But the signs were there. I ignored what they actually meant. She texted again the next morning. I didn't mean it the way it came out. Then, 20 minutes later, you always do this. You shut down instead of communicating. I put on coffee, answered the 2 missed calls from the night before, and made a reservation for lunch with a client who'd been trying to get 30 minutes with me for the better part of 6 weeks. By 9 a.m., the day was already full. Danielle called at noon. I let it go to voicemail. She didn't leave one. What she didn't understand, what she couldn't have understood from where she was standing, was that there are certain things you cannot come back from. Not because of pride, not because of ego, but because once someone shows you the lens through which they see you, you can't unsee it. The lens was always there. She just finally said it out loud. That's not an overreaction. That's information. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. We had been together for 4 years before the engagement. Met at a rooftop event in the West Loop. One of those industry mixers where everyone's business card is designed to make them sound more important than they are. She was there with her firm. I was there because a colleague had insisted, and I'd had nothing else that evening. She walked over to me. That part one always liked about Danielle. She didn't wait. She decided she wanted to talk to someone, and she walked over and talked. We had a good conversation. Smart, fast, the kind where you don't notice 2 hours passing. She was a senior associate at a mid-sized consulting firm at the time. Ambitious in the specific Chicago way, where ambition is less about money and more about being seen in the right rooms by the right people. She wanted a seat at the table. She wanted to be the person other people mentioned when opportunities arose. I respected that. I asked her to dinner 3 days later. By the second year, we had moved in together. By the third, she had joined a larger firm and started building what she called her network, which mostly meant attending the right events, aligning herself with the right names, and carefully curating what her life looked like from the outside. I proposed on a quiet evening at home. No performance. No restaurant setup with a violinist. Just the two of us, dinner she had cooked, and a question I'd been sitting with for a long time. She cried, said yes, called her mother immediately. For about 6 months after that, everything was fine. Then it started. The first time I noticed something was at a dinner hosted by one of her colleagues. A Thursday night in November, a nice place in River North, the kind of restaurant where the lighting is specifically designed to make everyone look like they belong in a magazine. There were 8 of us at the table. 2 partners from her firm, a woman named Andrea who Danielle had become increasingly close with over the previous year, and 3 or 4 others whose titles I've since forgotten. Somewhere between the appetizers and the main course, one of the partners turned to me and asked what I did. Before I could answer, Danielle said, "He's in consulting." The partner nodded politely and moved on. I looked at Danielle. She was already engaged in another conversation. On the drive home, I mentioned it. "You answered for me," I said. "I was just keeping the conversation moving. You know how those dinners are." She was looking at her phone. "Nobody wants the long version." I wasn't going to give the long version. "I know." She glanced over. "Don't be sensitive." I didn't push it, but I noticed. A few weeks later, she mentioned she wanted to attend a holiday gala hosted by one of the larger financial firms in the city. Black tie. She had been talking about it for days. The morning before, she knocked on the bathroom door while I was getting ready. "Are you wearing the brioni tonight?" she asked. I was thinking the other one, actually. Silence. "The gray one. It fits better," I said. "It doesn't have the right energy for this event," she said through the door. "People notice these things." I came out. She was already dressed, looking polished in the precise way she always managed for these evenings. "People will be looking at you," I said. "Not me. They'll be looking at both of us." She adjusted an earring in the mirror. "We're a unit. How you present reflects on me." I wore the brioni. She smiled when she saw it. A small, relieved smile. The kind you give when a problem has been solved rather than when you're proud of someone. Something about that smile stayed with me. The watch conversation happened in January. We were at a pre-dinner cocktail hour. Another firm event, Danielle's world entirely. People with job titles that were 3 lines long and handshakes that lasted exactly as long as they needed to. A man named Garrett, young, sharp suit, the easy confidence of someone who had been told he was exceptional since birth, looked down at my watch and said, "Is that an IWC?" "Portofino, yeah," I said. He nodded. "Nice piece." Danielle, who had been half listening beside me, leaned in slightly after Garrett moved away and said quietly, "You should get something with more presence. Something people recognize immediately." I looked at her. "It's a $43,000 watch, Danielle. It's understated." She sipped her champagne. Understated reads as invisible in these rooms. I didn't respond, but I thought about that. The idea that being invisible was a failure. That the absence of performance was the same as the absence of worth. It told me something about how she had started to see the world. And, by extension, how she had started to see me. At the firm's client appreciation dinner 2 months later, she introduced me to a senior vice president named Jared as my fiancé. Just that. Jared shook my hand, looked at me for a moment longer than a first meeting usually warrants, and said, "What did you say your name was?" I told him. Something crossed his face. Quick. Almost nothing. He opened his mouth, then seemed to reconsider, and simply said, "Good to meet you." Danielle had already turned to greet someone else. I didn't understand why Jared looked confused after hearing my name. I would understand later. By March, the small corrections had become routine. Don't talk too much at the Henderson dinner. They're very status conscious and you don't have the rapport yet. Don't mention the work in Phoenix. It's complicated to explain and it'll just raise questions. Sit at the far end of the table with the younger associates. The partners prefer to keep those conversations internal. Each one, individually, was reasonable enough. Together, they formed a pattern. She was managing how visible I was. More precisely, she was managing how visible I wasn't. Neil noticed before I said anything. Neil was my closest friend, had been since college, a man with the singular gift of seeing things clearly and the more singular patience to wait until you were ready to hear them. He'd met Danielle twice and been perfectly polite both times. But one afternoon over lunch, without any preamble, he set down his fork and said, "She's embarrassed by you." I didn't answer immediately. "Not always," he said. "Not in private, but publicly." Something changed. "It's a stressful time for her at the firm," I said. Neil looked at me for a moment. "Maybe," he said, and picked his fork back up. Spring arrived, and the social calendar accelerated. Danielle's ambitions had always run on a certain kind of fuel, recognition, the right name in the right conversation, the sense that she was accumulating something valuable and invisible. But that spring, with a potential promotion on the table and Andrea in her ear at every turn, the engine shifted into a different gear. Andrea was a particular type of woman, polished to an aggressive finish, the kind who complimented you and made you feel worse after. She worked at a wealth management firm and spoke almost exclusively in terms of access. Who had it, who was trying to get it, who had been denied it and didn't realize yet. She didn't like me. She never said it directly. She didn't have to. "Danielle deserves someone who matches her energy," she said once, in my presence, in a tone that was perfectly designed to be about something else entirely. Danielle laughed. I didn't. The networking circuit that spring involved a level of social performance I hadn't seen from her before. 3 or 4 events a week. Guest lists reviewed in advance. Outfits planned around room optics rather than personal taste. She started talking about the Harrington Circle, the way people talk about a country they're trying to get citizenship in, with a mixture of reverence and strategic desperation. The Harrington Group was a private equity firm, mid-sized but influential in the Chicago market, and its senior leadership had become the social trophy Danielle was hunting. Getting into their orbit, being recognized by the right 2 or 3 people, it would mean something to her career. It would mean something to her image. In her mind, the two were the same. I went to most of the events. I didn't complain. I understood what these environments meant to her, and I was willing to show up. But I noticed things. The way she maneuvered through rooms, always triangulating toward the most strategically valuable person present. The way she spoke differently to people she deemed important, her register shifting, voice slightly lower, more deliberate, more performed. The way she sometimes forgot, in those moments, that I was there. One evening at a rooftop event in the South Loop, I stepped away to take a call. A brief one. A colleague with a timing question about a project moving into its final phase. I was gone maybe 8 minutes. When I came back, I heard the tail end of a conversation between Danielle and a woman I didn't recognize. "He's sweet, but he doesn't really have executive energy. You know what I mean?" I stopped just outside the circle of conversation. The woman nodded sympathetically. "Ambition is attractive," Danielle continued. "He's just very settled." She said it the way you'd describe someone who had given up on something. Resigned. Comfortable. Finished. I waited for a moment, then stepped back into the group. Danielle saw me. Something moved quickly across her face. She covered it with a smile. "Hey," she said. "Everything okay?" "Fine," I said. "Just a work thing." She nodded and turned back to the conversation. I stood there, drink in hand, and felt something quietly shift inside me. Not anger. Not hurt exactly. More like recognition. The same kind of recognition you feel when a word you've been trying to remember suddenly arrives. Late, but undeniably correct. I took a call that same week from a senior director at a firm in New York. We spoke for 40 minutes about the next phase of a project that had been in development for the better part of a year. The call ended with him saying, "You're the only one I trust to handle the transition cleanly. I'll have the documentation to you by Thursday." I said I'd review it before the weekend. I mentioned this to Danielle that evening. Not the details, just the general shape of it. A long-standing project moving into a significant phase. "What kind of project?" she asked, scrolling her phone. "Operations strategy. Acquisition integration." She nodded in the way people nod when they're not listening. "At what level?" I asked her once, later, about her ambitions. What was the ceiling she was aiming for? "I want people to know my name," she said simply. "The right people." I understood that. I just understood it differently than she did. There was a dinner in April that I think about sometimes. It was a client dinner, hers, and she had asked me to come. 12 people, a private room at a restaurant in the Gold Coast, the kind of place where they don't put prices on the menu. 2 of the Harrington Group's executives were there. She had been planning the evening for weeks. Jared was one of them. We had met briefly twice before at this point, and each time he'd had that same look when he heard my name. A double take almost. A moment of recalibration. I had started to find it curious rather than confusing. That night, Jared arrived and shook hands around the table. When he reached me, he held the handshake a beat longer than necessary. "We keep running into each other," he said. "Small city," I said. He smiled at something. I wasn't sure what. Later, when the table had split into smaller conversations, he leaned across and asked quietly, "You're the one who handled the infrastructure redesign for Carver Holdings?" I looked at him. "Partially," I said. Something settled in his expression, like a piece fitting into place. "I thought so," he said. Danielle was across the table, deep in conversation with one of the other executives, working the room with every tool she had. She didn't catch the exchange. That conversation mattered more than she knew. May, a Wednesday evening. Andrea's birthday dinner. It was at her apartment, which was the kind of space designed to communicate things about its owner. Art that looked important without being identifiable. Furniture that prioritized appearance over comfort. A curated shelf of books that had clearly never been read. There were 14 guests. I knew 3 of them. I was present because Danielle had asked me to come and because I had nothing else. Somewhere after the second course, Andrea raised her glass and made a toast. Long, gracious, with the specific cadence of someone who had rehearsed it at least twice. Then she looked around the table and said, with the precision of an arrow released from a full draw, "And here's to everyone who's earned their place at the table." A beat, a laugh from the group, and then, quieter, for the section of the table where I was sitting, and to the partners who support us from the sidelines. A few people smiled, the kind of smile that isn't agreement but isn't disagreement either. Danielle laughed, a real laugh, present, amused. I set my fork down, pressed my napkin against my mouth once, folded it beside my plate, and said, pleasantly, "Andrea, the renovation on your building, the one that just completed last fall." She looked at me, slightly thrown. "Yes. Meridian Capital financed it. Do you know who structured that deal?" Silence. I smiled. "Just asking." I picked my fork back up. Andrea recovered quickly and redirected the conversation. But I noticed her watching me differently for the rest of the evening, calculating something she hadn't bothered to calculate before. In the car on the way home, Danielle stared out the window. "You embarrassed her," she said finally. I asked her a question. "You did it on purpose?" "I did," I said. "Yes." She turned to look at me. "Why?" "Because some things shouldn't be laughed at." She was quiet for the rest of the drive. 3 weeks later, I overheard a phone call. I wasn't trying to. I had come home early from a day that had ended ahead of schedule. Danielle was in the kitchen, on the phone, her voice carrying the particular openness of someone who believes they're alone. "It's not that he's not a good person. He is. He's a genuinely good person." A pause. "But good person isn't enough when you're trying to build a certain kind of life." Another pause. "Andrea says I'm settling. I keep telling her she doesn't understand the whole picture, but lately I'm starting to wonder if she does." I stood in the hallway for a moment. Then I went back to the front door, opened it, closed it louder than I'd opened it, and called out, "I'm home." She was off the phone by the time I reached the kitchen. "How was your day?" she asked. "Long," I said. "Good." She poured me a glass of water. I accepted it. We had dinner. We talked about a show we were watching. We went to bed. But something was different now. The shape of us was different. In June, Danielle came home from a dinner I hadn't attended. She had been to a Harrington Group event, higher level than the ones I'd been to, partners only essentially, and she had managed to get herself included through a contact she'd been cultivating for months. She was vibrating when she came in, the particular frequency of someone who has touched something she'd been reaching for. "It was incredible," she said. "The level of conversation in that room. These are people who have actually built things, who have real power. Do you know what that feels like?" I was reading. I looked up. "Tell me." It's different. The way they carry themselves. The way they talk about work. There's this confidence that's just." She trailed off, searching for the word. "Gravitational." "Gravitational," I said, like the room orients around them. She sat down across from me. "I want that. I want to be in that. I want to be seen as part of that world." I looked at her for a moment. "You will be," I said. "You're already building toward it." She smiled, and for a second she looked the way she had the night I proposed, like something she wanted was within reach. "I just need to make sure everything around me matches where I'm going," she said. She didn't say it as a criticism. She said it the way you describe rearranging furniture. Practical, logical, necessary. But I understood what she meant. I was the furniture she was considering. The evening it ended properly was a Tuesday in late June. We had come home from a dinner, one of the Harrington Group events, mid-tier, and things had been quiet between us in the car. Not hostile, just pressurized. The particular silence of something waiting to be said. She started it in the kitchen. The same kitchen as always. "I've been thinking," she said. "About what?" "About us." She was standing by the counter, arms loose at her sides. Not combative. Tired, maybe. Like she'd been carrying something heavy for a while. "About whether we're moving in the same direction." I waited. "You're comfortable," she said. "I respect that. Some people want a quiet life. Stability. That's real." She paused. "But I'm not built for quiet. I need momentum. I need to feel like the people around me are pushing towards something. And you don't feel that from me. I feel like you're fine with wherever you are." "I am fine with where I am," I said. Something shifted in her expression. Like that was the problem precisely. "I need more than fine," she said. "I need drive. I need someone who understands what it takes to get into those rooms and stay in them." I looked at her. "What do you actually know about the rooms I'm in, Danielle?" She blinked. "What? The rooms? The conversations? What do you actually know about my work?" She opened her mouth, closed it. "I know you're in consulting," she said finally. "I know you travel a lot. I know you take calls at odd hours. I know. You know I'm in consulting," I said. "Because that's the version you chose to share when people asked." Silence. "What does that mean?" "It means you reduced me to the most generic possible description every time you introduced me. Not because you didn't know more. Because more didn't fit what you were building." Her jaw tightened. "You're not being fair. I just feel embarrassed introducing you to certain people in my circle." Her own words back. She recognized them. Her face went very still. "I didn't say it exactly like." "You said it exactly like that," I said. 2 weeks ago. In this kitchen." She looked at the counter. "And you know what?" she continued quietly. "Maybe that's honest. Maybe you're not the kind of man people in my world respect. I don't mean that cruelly. I just mean there's a type of person who fits those environments, and you don't move through the world the way they do." I was quiet for a long moment. I thought about Jared. The look on his face when he heard my name. The question he'd asked me at dinner. "You're the one who handled the infrastructure redesign for Carver Holdings?" I thought about the Thursday calls with New York. The documentation sitting in my inbox. The project I had been running for 14 months that had never once come up at any of her dinners because she had never thought to ask. I thought about all the rooms she didn't know I was already in. I reached across the counter, picked up the ring she had put back on her finger after the first conversation. She had told me I'd overreacted. She had talked me into believing we could work through it. I slid it off her finger. She didn't stop me this time. I set it on the counter, picked up my phone, my jacket. "I'm not asking you to apologize," I said. "I'm not angry. I want you to build the life you want. I genuinely mean that." She was very still. "But I'm not going to let you decide what I'm worth." I looked at her. "That's not yours to determine." I walked to the door. "Where are you going?" she asked. Not loud. Almost small. "Home," I said. My lease is up next month," I said. "I'll arrange to have my things out before then." And I left. That was the last night I ever saw her as my future wife. The renovation on my place finished 3 weeks later. It was a 3-bedroom in the West Loop, high floor, purchased quietly 2 years earlier with cash after a project in Dallas had delivered well ahead of target. I had been meaning to update the kitchen and the primary bathroom for a while. The timing worked. I moved back in on a Thursday. Neil came over that weekend. We ordered food, sat by the windows, watched the city settle into evening. "How are you?" he asked. "Good," I said, and meant it. He nodded. He didn't say "I told you so." That wasn't how Neil operated. "You have that thing in Boston next week?" he asked. "Tuesday through Thursday. Then New York the week after." "You ever sleep?" "On planes." He laughed. The work had shifted, as it sometimes does when other things clear away from around it, into sharper focus. The acquisition integration I'd been consulting on for over a year was entering its final stage, and the level of trust the client had placed in my judgment had translated into a kind of access that was, by any external measure, significant. I was in rooms with people who ran billion-dollar decisions on the same quiet instincts they used to pick a lunch order. I understood those rooms. I had always understood them. I just hadn't announced it. The months that followed moved with the particular momentum of a life operating at its natural pace. Not aggressive, not performed, just consistent. In September, I was asked to speak on a panel at a private financial forum in New York. I declined. A partner role was offered at a firm that had been pursuing me for 18 months. I declined that too. Not because I wasn't interested, but because my current work had a shape I wasn't ready to trade for a title. Neil thought that was funny. "You turn down partner roles," he said. They wanted me to stop doing the work, I said. They just wanted my name. He shook his head, laughing. You know most people want their name wanted, he said. I know, I said. There were people in those circles who knew me. Some well, some in passing, some only by reputation, which in that world sometimes travels faster than presence. I had never been loud about any of it. It had never seemed necessary. Through the fall, I heard fragments about Danielle through the particular social osmosis of a city where certain industries overlap constantly. She was still at the firm, still working toward the Harrington orbit, still attending the right dinners. I didn't follow it closely. I wished her well, in the abstract, uncomplicated way you wish well to someone you no longer think about very much. I wasn't in the room. That's the part of this story I can only tell secondhand, reconstructed from two separate people who were there and saw it happen. One of them was Neil, who had been brought into the meeting as a secondary contact for his firm. The other was a junior analyst who told the story later at a dinner where I happened to be present, not knowing I was who he was describing. It was a Tuesday in November. Danielle's firm had been brought in to pitch an advisory role on a significant merger. A real opportunity. The kind that could, if it landed, define the next several years of a career. She had prepared for weeks. Andrea had helped her rehearse. She arrived at the Harrington Group offices in the precise outfit she had planned, with the precise language she had scripted, and sat down across from a table of 4 senior executives. Jared was among them. The presentation went well by all accounts. She was polished. She was prepared. Her research was solid, her delivery confident, her body language everything she had spent years cultivating. Then, near the end, one of the executives, not Jared, a man named Preston who ran the operations division, glanced at her bio on the one sheet in front of him and said, I noticed you're formerly engaged. Is that relevant to the Chicago connection you mentioned? It was a strange question, slightly off format. She answered it smoothly, something about professional networks, personal networks, the way relationships build over time in a city this size. Preston nodded. Then, who were you engaged to? She told him. The room changed. Not dramatically, not like a movie. Just a very particular kind of quiet that happens when information reorganizes several people's understanding simultaneously. Preston looked at Jared. Jared looked at his folder. Then he looked up. You were engaged to him, Jared said. Not a question. For about a year, yes, Danielle said. Something in the room had shifted, and she could feel it, but not locate it yet. We ended things earlier this year. Preston set the one sheet down. We've worked with him for going on 3 years, he said. He restructured the operational backbone of 2 of our acquisitions. The Carver Holdings integration alone. He glanced at Jared. He built the strategy, Jared said simply. We brought in outside teams to execute, but the architecture was his. Took something that was projected to be an 18-month integration and got it done in 11. Silence from Danielle's side of the table. We actually offered him a partner track last year, Preston said. He turned it down. There was something in his voice. Not quite admiration. More like the particular respect reserved for someone whose choices you don't entirely understand, but have learned to trust. He turned it down, Danielle said. Prefers the consulting structure, Jared said. More flexibility, more control over the work. He paused. He's exceptionally selective about what he takes on, which is part of why his name means what it means. Neil, sitting 2 seats from Danielle, said he could see her doing the math. Slowly. The way you piece something together when the pieces had been in front of you all along. Every event she'd attended. Every dinner table. Every room she had been working so hard to get into. The executives who had reacted when they heard his name. Jared's expression the first time they'd been introduced. The calls at odd hours. The travel. The way certain people spoke to him. The way certain people had always spoken to him. She had seen it. She had watched it happen. She had explained it away as coincidence, or been too focused on her own performance to register it, or had simply decided it couldn't mean what it appeared to mean because it didn't fit the version of him she had already decided was true. He never mentioned the Harrington connection? Preston asked. Danielle was quiet for a moment. No, she said. And that was the part, Neil told me later, that seemed to hit her the hardest. Not the revelation itself, not the professional weight of what she was learning, but the fact that I'd never mentioned it, that I'd sat through dinner after dinner in her world, in her rooms, around the very people she was trying to impress, and had simply been present without ever once using what I knew to change how she saw me, because it hadn't occurred to me to try. I heard the account 2 weeks later, at a dinner hosted by a mutual contact neither of us had known would overlap. Danielle was there. I hadn't known she would be. She hadn't known I would be either. I saw her from across the room first. She looked the way she always looked at these things, composed, deliberate, dressed for the environment. But there was something different in how she carried it. A slight looseness, like the performance had become effortful in a way it hadn't been before. She saw me a few minutes later. We crossed the room toward each other with the specific casualness of two people trying not to make a moment out of something. "Hey," she said. "Hey," I said. "You look good. So do you." She held her glass with both hands. Looked at me in a way I hadn't seen from her before. Not the assessing look from before, the one that was always measuring gap and fit and whether I matched the room. This was different. More direct. More honest. "I heard you've been busy," she said. "Staying out of trouble," I said. She almost smiled. I wanted to. She stopped. Started again. "I think I misunderstood you." I looked at her. "Not just what you do," she said. "I mean who you are." She paused. I think I decided I knew, and then I stopped looking. I didn't say anything for a moment. "I appreciate that," I said. She nodded. Looked down at her glass. "I'm not asking for." She shook her head. "I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted to say it." "I know," I said. "Thank you." A moment passed between us. Not warm exactly, but honest. The particular honesty of two people who have stopped pretending. "Take care of yourself, Danielle," I said. "You too," she said. I moved on to the other side of the room. I didn't look back. I thought about what she was chasing. Not with contempt, I mean that. The hunger for legitimacy, for being seen and recognized by people whose recognition feels like it means something. I understand that hunger. Most people who've ever wanted anything understand it. But there's a version of that hunger that turns inward on itself. That starts evaluating everything around you. People, relationships, partners, through the same transactional lens you use for career moves. And when that happens, you stop seeing what's actually there. You start seeing only what you've already decided to see. She decided I was ordinary. She never asked whether she was right. The executives at that table had known my name for 3 years. The work had spoken in rooms she hadn't known I'd ever entered. None of it had required me to announce it, defend it, or perform it for an audience. It had simply been true. And the one person who had been closest to me, who had shared a home, shared a ring, shared every dinner and event and quiet evening, had looked at me and chosen not to see it. That's not a failure of circumstance. That's a failure of attention. Neil asked me once, late in the summer, whether I regretted how long I'd stayed, whether I should have said something sooner, made myself legible in the way she needed. I thought about it genuinely. "No," I said finally. "Why not?" "Because I shouldn't have to prove myself to someone who loves me," I said. "That's not how it works." "Not really." Neil was quiet. "And if she'd needed me to," I said, "then I would have been building something on the wrong foundation anyway." He nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, that's right." The Harrington Group project moved into its final phase in December. I flew to New York on a Monday, met with the team through Wednesday, flew back in time for a dinner with 2 colleagues on Thursday evening. It was a good week. The kind that feels earned in a way that has nothing to do with who's watching. Somewhere in those months, in the quiet of a life moving at its own pace, I stopped thinking about the ring on the counter, the kitchen, the look on her face when she finally understood. I stopped thinking about what she thought of me. I hadn't realized, until I stopped, how much space it had been occupying. There's a kind of freedom in being seen correctly, and a different kind of freedom, quieter, more complete, in no longer needing to be seen at all. She spent years building toward rooms she thought defined worth. She spent years looking for men who carried their status on the outside, where she could read it, confirm it, present it to the right people, and feel reflected in it. She never understood that the most formidable people in those rooms she admired, the ones she found gravitational, the ones the conversation oriented around, almost none of them had announced themselves. They had simply arrived, and she had left one of them in a kitchen in the West Loop on a Tuesday night, telling him he didn't have executive energy, while executives across the city already knew his name. She spent years chasing impressive men. She never realized she had already left one.